On a balmy morning in August, with the skies above Normandy's coast clear and promising a delightful summer day, the 5,000 residents of Harfleur, a port town nestled near the Seine's mouth, embarked on their daily lives. By the time the sun reached its zenith, French fishermen were scattered across the sea, their nets cast into the waters near the coast, when an ominous vision emerged on the horizon. A massive fleet of ships steering southward across the Channel heralded the long-expected English invasion. The English crown had previously secured vast French territories following the resounding victories at Crécy and Poitiers. This protracted conflict, ignited in 1337 over English claims to the French throne and their holdings within France, seemed unending. However, in the ensuing years, England saw most of these territories slip from its grasp, owing to a combination of faltering resolve, domestic disputes, and the catastrophic impact of the Black Death, which ravaged the social structures across Europe. By the dawn of the 15th century, only fragmented territories in France remained under English dominion. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as this is a small channel, and your engagement helps us to create more content for you. In 1413, at the age of 26, Prince Henry V ascended to the English throne, succeeding his father, who had deposed the previous monarch, Richard II. Henry's claim to the crown was not universally accepted in the initial phase of his reign, given his father's usurpation, leading to skepticism among certain noble factions. This unrest soon manifested in conspiracies against him, which, though swiftly and harshly quelled, exposed the underlying frictions between the royal family and the aristocracy. Despite these domestic challenges, Henry recognised an opportunity to consolidate his rule and pursue his grand aspirations beyond England's borders by turning his gaze towards France. France at this time was embroiled in its own turmoil. The mental illness of King Charles VI had left the country's leadership in disarray, with the state's governance neglected and the nobility embroiled in a contest for power. This disarray presented Henry with an opportune moment to advance his own claims on French soil. Henry's demands were not just ambitious, they were extraordinary. He sought not only Aquitaine and the territories ceded to England through the Treaty of Bretigny, but also the revival of the ancient Angevin Empire by reclaiming Brittany, Normandy, Maine, Anjou, and Touraine. Furthermore, he aimed to extend his reach to Flanders, a region that had never fallen under English control. Beyond territorial gains, Henry insisted on the payment of the remaining 1.6 million crowns of the ransom for John II, captured during the Battle of Poitiers in 1356. He also proposed marriage to Princess Catherine, King Charles VI's daughter, with a hefty dowry of 2 million crowns. To put the financial demands into perspective, the cost of a warhorse at the time was about 80 crowns, meaning Henry's total request of 3.6 million crowns could have financed the purchase of 45,000 warhorses, equivalent to nearly $550 million today. In exchange for these concessions, Henry offered to abandon his claim to the French crown, a claim derived from his great-grandfather Edward III, who himself was the maternal grandson of the French King Philip IV. However, the proposal was too rich for the beleaguered French government, already struggling with internal discord and the king's incapacity. Instead, they countered with a dowry of 600,000 crowns and an offer to enlarge the territory of Aquitaine. The English regarded the French counter-proposal as a slight, interpreting it as a derision of their claims and a personal affront to King Henry himself. Convinced of the righteousness of his demands, Henry was prepared to enforce his rights through military might if diplomatic avenues failed to yield the desired results. Indeed, Henry's march towards conflict had commenced well before the diplomatic breakdown in June 1415. Utilising the drawn-out negotiations to his advantage, he cunningly secured either the support or the non-interference of John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. This strategic move aimed to leave the French coastline vulnerable by removing a key maritime defender. On August 11th, propelled by favourable winds, the English armada embarked towards France, targeting Harfleur as its initial conquest. This stronghold had long vexed England, serving as a launchpad for raids on the English southern coast. Its capture would not only neutralise a persistent threat, but also establish a crucial foothold for further incursions into France, complementing the strategic position of Calais up the coast. By the afternoon of August 14th, Henry's forces made landfall near the Seine's estuary. The strategy was clear: besiege Harfleur and sever its connections to prevent any influx of reinforcements or supplies. Thomas, Duke of Clarence, Henry's brother, took command of the eastern flank to obstruct any aid to the city, while the king directed the principal force. To breach Harfleur's formidable defences, characterised by 4.5-metre thick walls, water barriers, 24 towers, a robustly defended harbour, and a small but determined garrison of 250. In his ultimatum, Henry sought to terrify Harfleur's residents into submission by invoking a biblical principle. He claimed the divine right to annihilate the town should they resist, citing his claim to the French crown as justification for such extreme measures. As Thomas encircled the town from the land side, a flicker of hope arrived for Harfleur in the form of 300 French men-at-arms, hastily making their way under the leadership of Raoul de Gaucourt. Despite their limited numbers, these seasoned warriors bolstered the town's morale. In a defiant act of resistance, the French sealed the sluice gates, flooding the northern valley, signalling their refusal to capitulate to Henry's demands. The stage was set for confrontation, and not long after, the English siege engines began their relentless assault. The bombardment wreaked havoc on Harfleur's defences, damaging walls and towers, and even reaching the town's interior, instilling a constant fear of aerial devastation among its people. Yet the citizens and garrison, undeterred by the onslaught, rallied to defend their town. They operated the defensive artillery, catapults, and other siege engines, standing firm against the besiegers' might. The defenders skillfully targeted and inflicted severe casualties on Henry's specialist teams of gunners and siege engineers, who needed to approach the walls closely to be effective, thus exposing themselves to the deadly precision of the French defenders. Throughout the nights, Harfleur's tenacious inhabitants undertook urgent repairs to their battered fortifications, much to the bewilderment and irritation of the English forces laying siege. By the beginning of September, a fortnight into the siege, the summer's warmth transformed the flooded northern valley into a putrid swamp, teeming with disease. The stagnant waters became a breeding ground for illness, striking the English camp with dysentery and significantly weakening Henry's forces. Faced with a stalemate and the deteriorating health of his army, Henry resorted to drastic tactics. He commanded his sappers to tunnel beneath the walls, aiming to collapse these passages and bring down the town's defences. However, the defenders were equally resourceful, digging their own countermines to meet the English underground. These French counter-efforts successfully disrupted the English mining operations, directly engaging and repelling the sappers, effectively thwarting Henry's efforts to breach the city's fortifications through subterfuge. As the siege stretched into its fourth week, Henry commanded the positioning of wooden siege towers against the town's fortifications, signalling a direct assault. Yet the duration of the siege, while not extraordinary by the standards of the time, exceeded Henry's initial calculations in terms of both time and resources. The English camp grappled with dire sanitary conditions. Contaminated water sources and the consumption of unripe fruits, grapes, and shellfish, as noted by a chronicler of the era, further debilitated the troops. The close quarters of men, horses, and other animals, compounded by the accumulation of waste, fostered a breeding ground for disease. A widespread outbreak of dysentery decimated the ranks, claiming the lives of numerous soldiers and leaving others too ill to fight. High-ranking officers and common soldiers alike were struck down, with many given leave to return to England for recuperation after the siege concluded. Similarly, Harfleur was not immune to the ravages of the prolonged siege. Reports emerged of dysentery within its walls, a grim testament to the shared suffering of besieger and besieged. Nonetheless, in the face of relentless bombardment and the spectre of disease, the town's defenders mustered their courage. In a defiant act of resistance, they launched a sortie against the English siege lines. Under Gaucourt's leadership, the French defenders executed a daring manoeuvre, setting ablaze Henry's siege bastion and quickly withdrawing behind their fortifications. This act intensified the siege's stakes, signalling to the English the likelihood of an extended engagement outside Harfleur's walls. For Henry, the moment to act decisively had arrived. In a bold move, the king orchestrated an assault on the outer defences near the main gate, under a barrage of arrows from his archers. The English archers, employing incendiary arrows, managed to ignite one of the defensive towers, tipping the balance in favour of the attacking dismounted men-at-arms. The ensuing combat was brutal, with the French fiercely contesting the advance. Nonetheless, the English, under the command of John Holland, Earl of Huntingdon, captured the gate's fortifications, compelling the French to fall back into the town. The next day, Henry issued another demand for surrender, which was again rebuffed. With patience wearing thin, he ordered a preparatory signal for a comprehensive assault, instructing his artillery to barrage the town continuously, denying the defenders rest. The threat of a ruthless conquest, justified by Henry through biblical precedent, caused dissent among Harfleur's residents. Faced with the dire possibility of a massacre upon refusal to surrender, the town's morale began to fracture. Despite his readiness for a forceful takeover, Henry welcomed the defenders' willingness to engage in negotiations. After 2 days of talks, on September 18th, Harfleur's leaders consented to surrender if no reinforcements arrived by September 23rd. Gaucourt's attempts to summon a relief force proved futile, as he learned that the French were unable to muster a sufficient counterforce in time. The absence of reinforcements left Gaucourt with no recourse but to surrender Harfleur to Henry on September 22nd. Following the surrender, key figures from the town's defence were released, albeit under the condition that they present themselves as prisoners in Calais later on. The English took over administrative control of Harfleur, allowing local residents to stay provided they pledged loyalty to Henry. Those unwilling to swear allegiance were forced to leave. The siege took a heavy toll on Henry's forces, with a third of his army lost to death or disease, leaving him with approximately 7,100 soldiers. After allowing some time for rest and recuperation, Henry stationed a garrison of 300 men-at-arms and 900 archers in Harfleur. Then, with a force of 900 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers, he ventured into the Norman countryside. The stage was set near Agincourt, on a misty autumn day. The French forces, under Constable Charles d'Albret, eyed the English with a mix of resentment and anticipation, blaming them for the devastation of their lands. In contrast, the English, weary, outnumbered and plagued by illness, faced the grim prospect of death. United in solemnity, they collectively knelt, praying, each man kissing the earth and taking a morsel of soil in his mouth, a gesture symbolising their readiness to face their fate. As they stood, it was with the resolve to either achieve a costly victory or meet their end with valour. Securing Harfleur marked a pivotal moment for King Henry, yet it also presented a significant strategic quandary. His broader ambition targeted the key urban and fortified locations across northern France. By capturing these strategic points, Henry envisioned using them as springboards to extend his control and impose taxation on the regions around them, thus financing the ongoing military efforts. This strategy had garnered considerable support among both the populace and the nobility, with substantial funds raised through loans and parliamentary taxation to back the campaign. However, the conquest of Harfleur came at a steep price. The English forces were depleted, suffering from both the immediate toll of battle and the lingering effects of disease. With the onset of winter approaching and intelligence of French forces gathering near Rouen, the realisation dawned that Henry's grand plans would need to be deferred. During a strategic council, advice was given to Henry to establish a strong garrison in Harfleur and return to England, allowing his forces time to recuperate. Yet, Henry was acutely aware that merely holding Harfleur would not suffice. It would neither affirm the victory and authority he sought to establish his reign more securely, nor address the financial burdens incurred from the extensive campaign costs. Disregarding the cautious advice of his councillors, Henry decided to lead his army out of Harfleur, aiming for a rapid mounted trek to Calais. He dispatched instructions to William Bardolph, the governor, to head to the Somme estuary and secure a passage for the advancing English forces. Despite the safer option of naval transport through the Channel being suggested by his advisors, Henry was determined to march through northern France, signalling his defiance and asserting his claim over these territories. However, as soon as Henry's departure from Harfleur became known, the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, set out in pursuit. He called upon the local nobility to rally their forces and join him in a strategic move to encircle the English west of the Somme, intending to crush them there. Merely 3 days into their journey, Henry's forces arrived at the river only to find no trace of Bardolph or any prepared crossing point. Instead, they were met by French troops blocking their way. The anticipated swift march to Calais was thwarted. Confronted with this obstacle and the growing French forces, Henry had no choice but to lead his men upstream, seeking an unguarded crossing to prevent encirclement. Yet, d'Albret had anticipated such a manoeuvre. Fords and bridges along the river were either securely defended or deliberately destroyed. Anticipating Henry's need to follow the Somme towards Calais, Constable Charles d'Albret positioned his main force on the open plains near Péronne, aiming to cut off and confront the English army. In an effort to weaken the English, French detachments frequently harassed the marching column. Unexpectedly, Henry veered southeast, away from the anticipated route along the Somme. This manoeuvre has led some to speculate that during these skirmishes, Henry's forces might have captured and interrogated French soldiers. Such an interrogation could have revealed d'Albret's plan to intercept them near Péronne, prompting Henry's strategic diversion to the southeast, thus avoiding the French trap. As the English marched further from the safety of Calais, morale sagged with the spread of rumours about a looming confrontation. The fear was that, hemmed in near the river, they would be easily defeated. Then, a breakthrough came 11 days into their gruelling journey. English scouts discovered an unguarded crossing over the Somme. Successfully bypassing the French position at Péronne, Henry's forces found themselves on an unexpected and arduous route, transforming what was meant to be a swift 230-kilometre coastal march into a 426-kilometre slog across French territory. Exhausted, famished, and plagued by sickness, the troops' spirits were further tested when French heralds delivered a foreboding message from Charles d'Albret. The letter declared that the French would engage Henry's forces in battle before they could reach the sanctuary of Calais. In a determined push towards Calais, King Henry accelerated his army's pace northwest, hoping to outpace the French forces. However, the situation took a dire turn when scouts hastily returned with troubling intelligence. They reported that, upon learning of the English crossing the Somme, Constable Charles d'Albret had quickly left Péronne. He had managed to move ahead of Henry, now effectively blocking the English path to Calais near the castle of Agincourt. The way forward was barred. As darkness enveloped the landscape, neither army initiated combat, leading both to prepare for an overnight encampment. Within the French camp, the evening was marked by a semblance of normalcy and revelry. Meals were distributed, and the air was filled with calls for servants, pages, and comrades. The atmosphere was buoyed by music and the boisterous exchanges among soldiers, a common attempt to bolster morale on the eve of conflict. Contrastingly, the English camp was a realm of enforced quietude. King Henry, emphasising the need for discipline, commanded that silence prevail among his troops. Henry's insistence on vigilance was rooted in his concern for a potential nocturnal assault by the French cavalry. This caution was validated when a French detachment, comprising men-at-arms and archers, made a daring nocturnal approach. They ventured close enough to engage in a brief skirmish, during which a handful of English archers were captured. However, lacking the advantage of surprise, the French force withdrew. The weather that night worsened, with heavy rain and cold making the conditions for those encamped particularly harsh. Despite the discomfort, Henry made rounds throughout the camp, bolstering his men's spirits and readiness for the impending conflict. On the morning of St. Crispin's Day, the French forces started their preparations after sunrise, in stark contrast to the English, who broke camp before the first light. Henry's strategy to deploy his troops early was deliberate. He aimed to demonstrate to the French that his army was not just prepared, but keen for the battle ahead. The aftermath of the previous night's torrential rain presented an unforeseen advantage to Henry as dawn broke. The fields, freshly ploughed and seeded with winter crops, were transformed by the rain. Instead of draining away, the water lingered in the dense, clay-rich soil of the Somme region, creating a treacherously muddy terrain. Recognizing the potential to use this muddy quagmire to his tactical advantage, Henry strategically positioned his forces. He deployed 3 divisions of dismounted men-at-arms at the core of his formation, interspersed with small units of archers, while placing substantial contingents of longbowmen on the wings, forming a concave line. These archers planted sharpened stakes before them, aiming to thwart any cavalry charge and endanger the horses. Additionally, in a covert maneuver, Henry dispatched 200 mounted archers to navigate through the woods on the flank. Executing this strategy entailed significant risk, given that scouting parties from both sides were actively surveying the surrounding terrain for enemy movements. On the French side, Charles and his command structured their forces into 2 main battle lines, each consisting of thousands of infantry and dismounted men-at-arms. They interspersed archers and crossbowmen among the divisions and positioned cavalry units at the wings. A third reserve line was primarily made up of mounted men-at-arms. Although some accounts reference artillery, it seems these weapons did not play a significant role in the battle's outcome. The debate over the sizes of the opposing forces at Agincourt remains unresolved. After accounting for the losses sustained during the siege of Harfleur and the troops left to secure the newly captured town, Henry's campaign force was reduced to approximately 6,000 soldiers, including around 1,000 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers. The notion of a massive French army conflicts with the realities of medieval military logistics. The last instance of a French monarch rallying a force of 15,000 to 16,000 men dates back to the 1380s, drawing from across the kingdom. By 1415, recruitment efforts were hampered, especially south of the Loire River, making such numbers unlikely. Research led by Professor Anne Curry has shed light on this issue, suggesting that the French likely mustered no more than 12,000 soldiers at Agincourt. Contemporary records from France detailing the military expenditures for the 1415 campaign indicate the recruitment of 6,000 men-at-arms and 3,000 archers. In the weeks leading up to Agincourt, additional forces were rallied, bringing their total strength to approximately 12,000 soldiers. This composition confirms that the French forces potentially outnumbered the English by a ratio 2-to-1. A significant disparity was evident in the number of men-at-arms, with the French enjoying a 5-to-1 advantage over the English in this category. By 7 a.m. on the day of the battle, both armies had positioned themselves, yet a tense standoff ensued for several hours. Amidst the waiting, verbal taunts were exchanged across the field, heightening the atmosphere of anticipation. The Constable of France, commanding a larger force, had the luxury of patience, while Henry, significantly outnumbered, could not afford a hasty engagement. This deadlock reflected the strategic caution of both leaders, with neither willing to prematurely commit their forces to battle. Facing a dire shortage of provisions, the English army's situation was becoming increasingly desperate, contrasted starkly by the French, who were amply supplied. Some veteran French nobles argued for a strategy of attrition, advising to simply outweight the English, allowing hunger to weaken them further. As noon neared, many French nobles dispatched their servants to bring back food, while others rode their horses to maintain their warmth in anticipation of the prolonged standoff. Recognizing the French strategy to prolong the engagement and starve his forces, Henry decided to take a decisive action. He commanded, "Banners forward!" In response, his archers lifted their defensive stakes from the earth and moved ahead to a newly established line of engagement, causing a stir among the French ranks as they hastily organised themselves in reaction to the unexpected manoeuvre. At this critical juncture, Henry signalled to the archers concealed in the woodland. The 200 hidden bowmen launched a surprise attack, raining arrows down on the French. Accompanying the volleys were the cries of hunting calls, blurring the lines between battle and the aristocratic pastime of hunting. The mocking derision from the English archers, perceived as an affront to their honour by the French nobility, who traditionally disregarded the low-born English longbowmen, ignited their fury, compelling them into action. As the French began their advance, Henry astutely halted his men at the maximum effective range of the longbow, where the archers swiftly set their defensive stakes anew. The French cavalry, positioned on the flanks, charged with the objective of disrupting the formidable archer formations, thus paving the way for their heavily armoured infantry. Yet, the treacherous mud-laden field, turned sodden by the previous night's downpour, impeded their charge. The knights found themselves engulfed in a relentless barrage of arrows. The English and Welsh archers, equipped with bows of greater power and arrows designed to penetrate armour, proved devastating against the mounted assailants. The relentless volleys took a heavy toll on the knights. Many were struck down, others were dismounted as their injured horses panicked, causing chaos. These terrified animals fled back towards the French lines, colliding with the advancing infantry. This caused further disarray, trampling some of the dismounted men-at-arms and significantly disrupting the French formation's cohesion. The initial momentum of the French cavalry quickly diminished under the relentless English arrow storm. Survivors, gripped by fear, retreated past their own lines, though a handful of valiant souls regrouped to charge once more. The advancing front line of French troops, now primarily infantry, pressed on, moving through the heavy mud while enduring continuous arrow fire. The younger, more impetuous French nobles had assumed that the sight of their armoured might would instill terror in the English ranks. However, they underestimated the psychological and physical toll inflicted by the English longbows. By the time they engaged with the English forces, fatigue had set in, exacerbated by arrow wounds, diminishing their combat effectiveness. Nonetheless, their superior numbers initially forced the English line to give ground. In preparation for hand-to-hand combat, many French soldiers had shortened their lances, expecting to quickly overwhelm the English. This adaptation, while potentially beneficial in tight combat, inadvertently disadvantaged them against the English, who wielded longer weapons that allowed them to strike at the French from a distance, targeting the more vulnerable areas of their adversaries. As the battle intensified, the battlefield became littered with the fallen, some dying from their wounds, others trapped beneath bodies in the melee, suffocating or crushed. The arrival of the French 2nd Division into the fray did not turn the tide as hoped. Instead, their attempt to push through the ranks of the 1st Division resulted in further disarray rather than bolstering the assault. The cramped conditions prevented any meaningful reinforcement of the offensive, exacerbating the confusion among French troops. With the English defensive line holding but stretched to its limits, the archers transitioned from ranged to close-quarters combat. Discarding their bows, they wielded swords, axes, hammers, and daggers, leveraging their lighter armour and agility to navigate the muddy battlefield effectively. This allowed them to penetrate the French lines, further disrupting their formations. With no reinforcements at his disposal, King Henry himself engaged in the melee, demonstrating his leadership and valour. The conflict saw many French nobles and men-at-arms overpowered and taken prisoner, valuable for the ransoms they could bring. As the battle wore on, both sides eventually expended their energy, and the outcome became clear within a couple of hours. The remnants of the French forces, battered and diminished, retreated towards their yet unengaged 3rd Division, which now faced the dilemma of whether to advance into a battle that had already been lost. In the aftermath of the main engagement, as the English forces regrouped, an unexpected threat materialised from behind their lines. A local French nobleman, accompanied by a cadre of knights and a band of peasants, made a sudden appearance. Initially, it seemed they might launch a surprise attack on Henry's rear, but instead they stormed the English encampment, seizing valuable items including the king's personal belongings and a spare crown. Faced with the uncertainty of another French assault and the possibility of being encircled by fresh enemy forces, Henry made the grim decision to execute the prisoners of war. This drastic measure aimed to prevent the captured soldiers from being rearmed and joining any subsequent French counterattack. As this harrowing act was carried out, Henry dispatched a herald to the 3rd French Division with a command to vacate the battlefield, leading to their withdrawal shortly thereafter. The English sustained significant losses, with casualties estimated at no more than 600. Among the fallen were notable figures such as the Earl of Suffolk and the Duke of York. In a poignant display of brotherhood, Henry was seen defending his severely injured sibling, the Duke of Gloucester, amidst the chaos of battle. In the aftermath of the battle, the French side suffered devastating losses, with the construction of 5 mass graves, each containing the remains of 1,000 to 1,200 soldiers, totalling around 5,000 fatalities, though estimates suggest the toll could have been even higher. Among the fallen were several of France's military and noble elite, including the Constable of France, the Dukes of Alençon and Boucicaut. Their deaths marked a significant blow to French morale and leadership. This remarkable victory drastically altered the course of the 100 Years' War, effectively bringing the French kingdom to a state of vulnerability. Henry V's subsequent achievements, including the capture of Harfleur and the overwhelming success at Agincourt, elevated him to the status of a national icon in an England that was just beginning to forge a unified national identity. Henry's ascent as a prominent figure on the European stage was rapid. By 1416, he received a visit from the King of Hungary, later Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund, forging an alliance that would prove beneficial. Henry's ambitions continued to unfold as he returned to France with the objective of capturing Normandy, culminating in the surrender of Rouen, the northern French capital, in 1419. The same year witnessed the assassination of Duke John the Fearless, an event that eventually led to a pivotal alliance with Burgundy. The string of military victories achieved by Henry V culminated in the French capitulation to the terms set forth in the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. This pivotal agreement recognised Henry not only as the heir apparent to the French throne, but also as the regent of France, cementing his authority and influence within the kingdom. Additionally, as part of the treaty's stipulations, he was married to Catherine, the daughter of King Charles VI of France. At this juncture, Henry's ascendancy seemed unparalleled, marking the zenith of his reign as a young monarch whose power stretched across England and into France. However, the tide of fortune was not to remain in his favour. His health began to fail during the prolonged sieges of Melun and Meaux, campaigns intended to solidify his conquests. Tragically, at the age of 36, Henry succumbed to what is believed to have been dysentery, passing away in the Chateau of Vincennes in 1422. His premature death marked the end of a meteoric rise and left a legacy characterised by both remarkable achievements and unfulfilled potential.